Welcome to the Media Roundtable. We're talking to leading voices in podcast about what they create, why they create it, and the impact they want to have on the world. So whether you're a member of the media or the marketing community, or a podcast listener who just cares about the direction of this country and the messages that you advance, we want to help you feel good about what you consume, what you distribute, and what you support. I'm your host, Dan Granger, and today we are joined by Kierna Mayo. Now, who is Kierna? Kierna is a cultural king and queen maker, and if you don't know her directly, you know her influence in the community. She is currently the host of a new podcast called Culturati, with Conversations with Kierna Mayo, which is a Black woman's perspective on culture, and it's executive produced by our friend Dave Mays and the Breakbeat family. She's also currently the vice president and executive editor of Rock Lit 101 and One World through Penguin Random House Books. She is the showrunner and head writer for the Lena Horne Prize for Artists Creating Social Impact, which, by the way, a very important theme on this show. And she's been a pioneering hip hop journalist and an original member of the Source magazine Mind Squad. In addition to that, she was co-founder and editor-in-chief of Honey magazine, as well as editor-in-chief of Ebony. Above all else, she's just been a pillar of her community for decades, and she's doing work that matters. I could go on, but instead of me telling you more about Kierna, I'd love to let you hear from her first. And by the way, we're so fortunate. We're actually recording this today on the first day of Black History Month. And what could be a better way to kick that off than talking to somebody who's been at front and center of so much cultural history in the last few decades in this country. Welcome, Kierna. So glad to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me, Dan. I really appreciate that introduction. It was quite kind.
Thank you. Well, and I as long as it's accurate, I'm happy because you've done some really impressive work. We're excited to get into that with you. Now, first and foremost, you're a podcaster now, but you are a writer. You are truly a writer. Now, my question on that is, did you make a choice to be a writer, or do you feel like writing chose you?
Folks say that, don't they? Yeah. So yes, I feel like writing chose me, and I chose to be a writer. So, and there's a distinction, I'd say. So the passion, did it come to me naturally? Yes. Did I discover words? And by the way, not just words, but words and images, storytelling overall, like was something that spoke to me as a very young person. I was in love with magazines and, was always looking for the one Black model in, that month's issue of what you name it in 1980, you name it, right? But at a certain point in my life, certainly by college, I recognized that being a writer, being a journalist, being a reporter, being in the media actually had a path, and that there were steps that I would have to take if I was going to really make my writing come to life. It's ironic, flash forward many, many years, because now I'm a book editor, again, very close to the word, and helping give other writers real space to tell some really beautiful and sometimes never before told stories.
So you're having the balance, I think what many people struggle with when they evolve in their careers and they get to that next level, which is you're not just responsible for doing hands-on, but you're responsible for managing the work of other people and giving voices or platforms to other voices and not actually being the hands-on writer. What's that transition been like for you?
Well, that's also been a reality, I think, the whole way through. I've been both the maker and creator, as well as the space maker and creator. And a lot of that has to do with being a Black woman in media, quite frankly. I simply couldn't afford to not carve out space wherever I was, because it was incumbent upon me to make sure that other folks who look like me can be in the room as well. So a lot of what you do as a writer, particularly in the magazine space, which is where my career began. You talked about David Mays and The Source, and that was actually my very first job out of college. And that is very much teamwork. So media, by and large, doesn't happen on the backs of individuals, even the person that's in front of the camera or the person who's got the byline. A lot of times there are a whole bunch of folks who are pouring in to a moment in order to make it happen. So I learned early on that my relationships were going to be key, you know, getting people to trust me, both as a writer and a journalist and somebody who was probing and asking questions and hoping that people would just trust me fundamentally with their truths. But then also knowing where culture was shifting and just having an eye on things that my peers and a lot of my white peers certainly over the years missed wholesale. Being smart enough to have other young people around me, Black and brown people, women, all kinds of folks who are traditionally marginalized, being incredible thinkers and cultural kind of shapeshifters, helping us understand culture at large at every media outlet I've been to. So whether it's magazines or books or now podcasts, it's the kind of the same MO. You know, I'm treating myself as both subject and object.
Yeah. So you said something which I think is easy to under value, but it's really, really powerful. Your first job out of college was writing at The Source. You know, of all the gin joints, can you explain to people who may not be familiar what The Source was and still
Oh,
represents
wow.
today that you were a part of? I mean, to be at the front lines that early is crazy.
Yeah, absolutely crazy. And it was just another one of those moments in my life that felt very serendipitous and, you know, like I was just in the right space at the right time as culture was shifting. So The Source in the early 90s literally was called the Bible. Anybody in the music industry that knew anything about hip hop understood The Source to be that. Of course, this is before social media. This is before the internet, even. I
Yeah.
think maybe
Well, before we were
it's
all on
early
the,
on.
we were not on the internet every
We
day as we
weren't
are
on it
today.
exactly. And
Yeah.
so the way we communicated and our sources, no pun intended, for valuable information, particularly about culture and subculture, because at that point hip hop really hadn't even been fully exported, right? It was still being made by the original makers in a lot
Yeah.
of respects.
Yeah.
And even within the nation, everyone wasn't on the same page about the impact and the potential future of this culture that was being created by young people, right?
Mm-hmm.
So The Source was just dead smack in the middle. Here we were in this office, a bunch of Black and brown kids, white kids. You know, I always say we were the real world before the real world
Mm-hmm.
because we were young people in a room there till wee hours of the morning, almost every night, debating, thinking, planning, fighting, like really taking the culture to task. And we were the first to do so, the
Mm-hmm.
first to understand that it was more than just music, but there was actually a body politic that was tied to hip hop culture. There was also, really intense personal and human interest stories that were tied to hip hop culture, and that we were influencing America at large. So to be in the room with the other young 20 somethings, making shot calling all the way through, put us in a really important seat. The whole industry, like I said, referenced us, needed us. We broke artists. I mean, many people know that you have people like, we call them Biggie Smalls and Notorious B.I.G. come through The Source, and Unsigned Hype. Tons of folks that have made hip hop history were discovered on the pages of The Source, not just artists, but also writers, thinkers, all kinds of folks were on those early pages. So it was really an honor to be there during that time. It couldn't be replicated today because the world has changed so much. And this idea of being singular is almost impossible, but that's literally what we were.
So do you feel like it would be accurate to say that you were part of one of the primary forces that brought the hip hop community into the mainstream?
Oh, yeah.
Because so many
It's
people today, like
the
adults
fact.
now, it's just been reality. But at that time, that was revolutionary. That was,
Right. And, and we
yeah,
were not talking about, well, I guess we are talking about 50 years ago in some respects, not The Source's origin, but hip hop itself was
sure.
coming up on its 50th birthday, right? But for the first 20 years of that 50, it was completely underground.
Yeah.
So until there are moments like The Source that are not seen as just fanzines, like teeny boppy fanzines, but actually, again, are taking seriously the importance of the development of this culture and what it was suggesting at that time. There was just so much foresight involved in that, so much visionary practice for us to really understand that we were at the beginning of something, but that the way we treated it then would impact, its force in the world, even today. So I just have to say it was an important time. It wasn't 100 years ago. For me, it wasn't even 50 years ago, but just 30 years ago, we were at the forefront of the invention, really, of one of the last truly American art forms to come to fore. Hip hop is that thing. Outside of hip hop, I challenge anyone to name something that's genuinely a true original American art form that was founded in the last 50 years. That's not hip hop.
No, nothing touches it.
Right.
So,
Nothing touches it.
so what did that teach you about finding your lane as the media world has gotten increasingly fragmented? And I know that
Right.
was just the early part, but how did, because I want to transition to Honey a little bit, but it seems like you went from a niche to an even more targeted niche. And I wonder, were there lessons that you picked up in that experience that made it possible for you to see what else you could do?
Certainly, and you're asking me, remember, Dan, you asked me to go way, way, way back, right? I was a baby. I knew nothing except for what I knew. And that was a driving force for me. Black girl, born and raised in Brooklyn, New York, really a hip hop kid myself. I mean, part of why the source made sense for me culturally is because I was a part of that subculture, right? I went to high school with all kinds of rappers. I was in the clubs myself. I was listening to the music. I was spending my money on albums and then later CDs. So understanding that what we now call niche is actually people's entire universes, right? At a given point in time. So what I can look at now as a media person and say, sure, that was a slice of American life that was niche. For me, it was my entire world.
Yep.
It was what I knew. It was what I understood. And because it connected me to other young people like myself, who in many areas of American society were completely disenfranchised, even in the world of media, right? Coming out of college and having this idea that I would be welcomed into the world of women's magazines and fashion magazines, even though there were no young Black women in the halls of Condé Nast and Hearst and Time Inc. and those places at that time. I mean, truly, it sounds like I'm exaggerating and it sounds like I'm talking about 100 years ago, but I mean, really, just 30 years ago,
Wow.
there wasn't a tribe that you could just attach yourself to and they felt like you and you felt like them. So a lot of the work was about, again, carving space. And all you could do was bring what you already had with you. But it was so inherently powerful. It was my first lesson about audience. Like, never mind what they're telling you about demographics, and never mind the data in a lot of respects. When it comes to being a culture creator, your first mind has to not be external, but internal. You have to filter what you see. You have to really process what is going on in the world around you with respect, with a certain kind of remove as well. Because even though you're in the world, I think it's really important to be able to objectively see what you see what you're experiencing, almost as an outsider to your own experience. Later on, you let all those outside influences about data and about audience development, et cetera, impact your thinking. But I think at its core, the most successful storytellers, writers, editors, filmmakers, screenwriters, et cetera, are people that are very careful watchers and listeners. They are keen on the world around them. And that's just, that was my biggest lesson.
Well, and that's something, I think that journey is starting to emerge as you develop Culturati. And
Yeah.
I want to tease a little bit of the 2-part series you did on your experience with Honey. Can you just talk a little bit about how did you get from the source to launching your own magazine specifically for not just the hip hop community, but Black women
Yeah.
and those voices.
So Black women and other women of color, and it was very feministy in its expression, but how it comes to be, and you can listen to anybody watching or listening, and certainly listen to Culturati. Those are my first two episodes really explain the making of Honey Magazine, how it came to be. But it was a really important time in my career, and it happened after the Source. It's the late 90s now, but because of my time at the Source and witnessing David Mays and witnessing all of the young work that we were doing, the young people that in the work that we were doing, it gave me a certain verve, you know, it helped me understand that it could happen. I think prior to being at the Source, I thought you had to be a 65-year-old white man to publish anything. I didn't really close the gap between me being able to actually create the thing that I wanted to see, you know, and it existing. I thought somehow someone else had to do it. But being at the Source was a huge, huge lesson. And myself and my best friend, Joycelyn Dingle, who was my partner on Honey, and we went to Hampton University together, she had always had a vision of creating a magazine. So we really took her passion and dedication to kind of knocking down doors and selling this idea with what I had learned in a very practical way about magazine making throughout the 90s. And we married those things together and knocked on doors and really shopped this idea for a publication that was not Essence Magazine, although it couldn't have existed without Essence Magazine. But we were making the case that women of the hip hop nation were a new kind of thing. Like we were a demographic that was more of a psychographic than anything else. And we were the first group of young women who were bonded by a subculture. And that, you know, America was really beginning to recognize because they were using us to figure out what to put on Hollywood stars. They were using what we were doing in the streets and the things that we were wearing and the way that we were talking to outfit Fifth Avenue and runways, right? So Black girls and Latinx girls and those of us who were really shaping this culture in the early days were also doing a lot more than just talking to one another. We were influencing culture at large. And I knew that the time for Honey had really, really come.
And I know that you know, you talk in the episode about the painful, not just the pain of getting it started and some of the very humbling and just sad circumstances in terms of how you had to compromise ownership, even as a founding editor-in-chief. But then also it seems like it was bookended very much the same way in that experience. Can you talk about the transition going from Honey and you know how you reflect back on those circumstances?
Sure. You know, well, again, I emote quite a bit in the podcast because it was emotional, you know, and there's really no way around that. When you work as hard as we did to bring something to life, it's pretty devastating to lose it before it's even begun to really flourish. But in hindsight, and I've had many, many, many years of hindsight, of course, I understand that that work was important to create the domino effect that would make space for so many more women who actually, quite frankly, remind me of myself 20 years ago, 30 years ago. And if that's not what we set out to do with Honey, then I don't know what is. The whole idea was to recognize that we were a force. The whole idea was to be this reflection of what like Black girl magic really was. We weren't calling it that, but we were certainly understanding it as such. And I think it was an early example of that and like leads the way to these moments where we can have that kind of language, where we can get to a place that a Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw creates this idea of intersectionality, and we're talking about it and recognizing it as a real state of existence for most Black women, where we can talk about Black girl magic and really understand that there is a special sauce. It's not that Black women and girls don't bleed. You know, we work hard and we hurt like everyone else, but that we do bring something quite unique to the table most times. And it's worth recognizing, it's worth hearing out, it's worth making space for. So that's what we were trying to do back then. So what if it ended the way that it did? I think the greater moral of the story is that it helped sharpen my knife, that's for sure.
Yeah.
And it also made space. And I'm very proud of that.
Well, and so before we move on from the honey conversation, there was something very important that I've been learning about the cultural significance of it, in that as places like the Source were advancing the hip hop community and making it more prominent, there was still a disparity in the treatment of women in that culture that it seems like you provided advocacy for through Honey, and that maybe that's a bigger part of that domino effect. Can you, if that's a fair representation, can you elaborate on that a little bit?
It is. And when you say that culture, I'm presuming you mean hip hop culture, right?
Hip hop, yeah.
And I think today we would even just call it the culture because it's so ubiquitous. We don't even have to name it anymore.
Yeah.
Like hip hop is everywhere, whether you recognize it or not. It influences all of us. It's used to sell product every day, all day. So regardless of what age you are or what race you are, today we all understand that this culture really touches us all. And being a woman in hip hop at that time was both exhilarating, again, being a part of said culture that is actually cool and electric, you know what I'm saying, and smart and provocative, like all the things, anything a young person could ever dream about being down with, that's what it was the recipe for. So of course it's thrilling. But hip hop is also as American as apple pie. And America itself has a huge problem with patriarchy, with misogyny, with sexism, with the treatment of women, right? And this doesn't begin with young Black and brown kids in the 70s in the Bronx. This is actually institutional and foundational to the American experiment. And the ways in which it plays out in hip hop were then very complex, very layered and nuanced, and they are today. And it requires women and men and folks of all genders, really, who are smart enough and empathetic enough to understand that this is an ill, that if we don't unite around it, we really can't thrive collectively. And so, our communities, hip hop community, Black community, the American community, we all suffer when women aren't given a fair shot and when we are persecuted and harmed and abused and all of the things that subcultures can sometimes bury, but they're right there beneath the surface. And sometimes in culture and in subcultures, it's not buried at all. It's really right on top of the surface. I was just recently, I was telling you before we got together that I'm in a new documentary on Showtime about Bill Cosby, and it's called We Need to Talk About Bill Cosby. And we do. And part of what we have to talk about Bill Cosby is the fact that within one human being, you have someone that did so much for the advent of Black artists, of popular culture, of Hollywood, of comedy, and you had someone who was a serial rapist, alleged to be more than 60 times over. And so it doesn't serve any of us to only hold one of those things. We have to hold it all at the same time. And I'd like to think that my entire career has been a long walk of trying to do that. Thesaurus, Honey, and every place I've been since then.
It's such a fascinating topic, and we could spend the rest of our time on that. But I want to ask you, in your own life, when you experience something like that, when you see an icon become exposed for hideous activities, and you're trying to hold the work in one hand or the positives that they did for culture in one hand, and balance that with, the most horrifying other actions you can conceive, can you still consume that art as you go back and look at it? For example, there are people, and we don't have to pick on the hip hop community because we're seeing this in really all
That's
fields,
my point.
right?
Yeah.
But but there are people that they won't listen to Michael Jackson. They will not listen to R. Kelly, but it transcends. But it's a hard equation, because where do you draw the line on the behaviors and the personal conduct of artists or people that create something that you consume? So how have you chosen to reconcile that, or how do you live that out?
Yeah, to keep it real, Dan, I think every time, oh, so sorry. I think every time I'm confronted with that, it's always individual, right? It always feels personal, and I'm inconsistent, right? So I am not going to watch a Woody Allen film,
Yeah.
not into it.
Yeah.
Understand his talent, understand the breadth of his work, not interested. I am also not going to play an R. Kelly song if I'm at the wedding or the cookout and the R. Kelly song comes on, right? Or the Michael Jackson song comes on. Depending on my mood, maybe I'm still on the dance floor dancing it out. Maybe I sit this one out. It really is so personal, because the ways in which art and culture impacts our lives is very close to the heart, right? We all have our faves, right? Whatever our faves are: music, film, television, art, you name it. And the journey to understanding or reconciling when brilliant people do horrible things is just as personal. So, I mean, I've cried thinking about Michael Jackson, and I know that there are many people who don't believe the charges. I'm someone who does. That is a very difficult thing to reconcile if you've loved Michael Jackson the way that I spent my entire life loving Michael Jackson. So I don't pretend to have the answer. I don't want to be prescriptive to anyone when I know I've not been consistent. But I know the value of the Cosby Show. I just can't personally watch it.
Yeah.
If I were sitting with a 10-year-old who wanted to watch it, I think I would be excited for them getting that slice of Black life through that lens, because it was wonderful. And I remember when it was wonderful and not tainted for me. It's tough.
It's
really
tough. Well, that was
tough.
thank you for that raw honesty and vulnerability in that, because I don't know anybody that's got a good answer on it.
Yeah.
And we all have to figure it out, right? We all have to figure out, how do we deal with these choices now?
Yeah. We want to be absolute, but we're not. And this isn't that kind of life, right?
No, it's not. No, it's
It's
not.
not. It's really not.
Well, and so let's jump to your time at Ebony. So that was that's a real prestige position that you found yourself in, working your way. You started in digital, and then you became editor-in-chief, as I understand it.
Yes.
And even using imagery. You were talking about imagery, because it's not just writing. Magazine covers can have power and staying power, that really change somebody's perspective. And you even did that with Cosby then, correct?
Yeah. That's actually why I'm invited into the conversation now, almost 10 years after my Ebony run began. Ebony was, first of all, let me just say, if you are me and you're somebody who spent so many years dreaming about being in the world of magazines, only to discover that there was no easy path into most of the places where magazines were made, purely because of my race. People don't want to say it because things have changed so much, perhaps. But it's true that it wasn't very long ago where the halls of some of the largest publishers in the world simply were not diverse on any level.
Yeah.
So in my community, Ebony and Essence, particularly during my era and coming up when I did, they were icons, beacons for not just news, but also culture and self-affirmation, just to say, we are here and we matter. So before we had the slogan and the movement of Black Lives Matter, we had media who was living that truth, showing that Black lives actually matter, right? And I always wanted to be a part of that. Yeah. So to find myself at the top of the masthead at Ebony Magazine was one of those times in my career when I can say it was simply a dream come true. Was it a perfect experience? Absolutely not. It was rife with challenges, as a matter of fact. But it wasn't lost on me that I was making history. And I didn't know how long it would last, but I knew that I was going to take my little time there to make a difference. And the world was really shifting away from print at the time that I got this job. It was actually a debate as to whether or not it was smart for me to leave digital. Like, who leaves digital to go back to print? No one does that. But I did it at the time because it was a calling for me, for one, but also because I had an early digital understanding, and I had an idea about ways in which to, for lack of a better term, SEO print titles. I had a new relationship with how to talk to readers. I had a new relationship with how to be like pithy and quick and visceral. And I married what I had learned from digital to the making of the covers of Ebony for the time that I was there. And we were actually able to have some early viral success with that. And one of those covers was that Cosby Show cover. It was a press shot of the Cosby Show, and we used a brilliant artist who did a new rendition of it with shattered glass on top of that image, and the break begins on the middle, at the middle of Cosby's face. And it created a huge firestorm of controversy and conversation, which is what it was really always about. And it forced us to confront what we've still yet to fully confront around this complexity when brilliant people do really bad things.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and it seems like not only were you able to advance technologically, or, just in terms of as digital marketer, but also it seems like you were able to modernize what types of stories were getting covered, right? So you were able to help them kind of step into the future in a sense. Can you share some of that?
Well, that was my mission. And I felt pretty confident because I had been in media for many years prior to that time. And I knew that my progressive core was at that point a key to my own personal success. So it didn't make sense for me to abandon that which I knew and that which I stood on once I had the biggest platform I'd ever had in my life. At that point, it was like, okay, full steam, go forth with your progressive politics and let the chips fall where they may. I happen to think that young people tend to be open-minded in a way that allows for new conversations, right? And things that make us uncomfortable a lot more than folks who are really invested in their way of seeing the world, and it's their way or the highway. So I leaned on my relationships. I had brilliant editors who were younger than me and smarter than me, who were pushing me, right? And giving me the confidence to go to the powers that be to say, we believe this firmly, that this is the direction this magazine needs to go in, that this is what's going to bring the largest audience share along with us. Again, you're talking about a publication that was at the time, 70 years old or something.
Yeah.
It was about finding new audience. It was never going to be enough to just talk to my mother or my grandmother or even me, quite frankly.
Yeah.
If we weren't bringing people along, then what were we really doing? So it was a unique opportunity to double down on my truth, right?
Yeah.
On the thing, on my proof points, but also on my politics. And it worked. And I'm proud of that work as well.
How well do you remember interviewing Hillary Clinton while you were there?
I remember interviewing Hillary Clinton quite well. I don't think one would ever forget that.
What was that like for you? You were very bold and I only saw a clip. I don't know how long the actual interview was, but I saw you take her on pandering to the Black community, and I'm like, holy shit. The boldness of being, asking a confrontational question when you have such a powerful person in one, just a small amount of time to talk to them. Tell me about that.
I'm glad you asked that. I'm glad you framed this this way, because it makes me think about Culturati and what I'm really trying to do.
Yeah.
It's not that it's not that your heart's not beating, right?
Yeah.
I think when you're in a room with important people, with powerful people, I think the average person, I think even the professional journalist has
Yeah.
some palpitations, right? You've probably
Yeah.
experienced this
Oh
yourself,
yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So it's not that you're not a person,
Yeah.
but you are on a mission. And how many shots at this mission are you going to get?
Yeah.
So I just think who I am fundamentally, when I'm faced with something that scares me, I typically lean in instead of out.
Mhm.
And I had some questions for Hillary,
Yeah.
and they were about pandering, particularly at that time. Have a lot of respect for her. I think
Yeah.
she's a brilliant woman and an important politician, and has clearly made history and created a lot of space for women by and large. But the job is to ask the questions, and you can't mess around when it comes to keeping it real when you have to ask the questions. And I found that most people respect folks who keep it real. It's just been my experience that you get a lot more out of folks who recognize that you're not there to pander them or
Yeah.
an audience, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
They feel you, they connect with you more. And that's what happened in that conversation with her. I mean, it I'm sure it threw her off. And I'm sure it wasn't exactly what she wanted to happen in that moment. But at the same time, she answered the question, and she did her best. And I think that that was an opportunity for both of us.
Well, in the question, I don't want to even try to restate it, but the spirit of it, as I understood it, was basically, it's you were, and I'll explain why I'm going back to this, but you were talking about things that she had done or been charged with, where she was trying to put on a face that was inauthentic to cozy up to the Black community. And the reason I think this is an important question, it's not about Hillary. This is so much increasingly relevant now
Sure.
in a post George Floyd world. How do you see everybody pandering right now? Do you feel like there is pandering going on? Corporations, I mean, culture broadly. Do you feel like, how much of what you see happening do you find to be authentic versus pandering?
Right. First, let me say, I don't know that Hillary Clinton was inauthentic. Those were the charges that were being leveled against her. And I
Yeah.
wanted to know her reaction
Yeah.
to that. She happens to have a history of having done significant work in the Black community, as well as some more complicated things where she could be criticized and critiqued. It is, I don't know, you asked me some really good questions, because
Thank you.
we live in a white supremacist, if you're asking me, racist world. It's a hard pill to swallow for most of us, right? Across the board. It's
Yeah.
not a comfortable thing to say. It's
Yeah.
not a comfortable thing to hear. It's not a comfortable thing to experience, more
Yeah.
importantly.
Yeah.
And pandering, I don't even know if that is the most accurate term, but I will say that I still do not think, in a post George Floyd world, that most white founded and led and populated institutions, which are by and large most of the institutions that all of us know, as well as most white individuals, have fully reckoned with Black humanity. And that's, to me, at the core of why we can't get to the truth of things, right?
Yeah.
I don't think that most people, non-Black people, are bad people. I don't think that most racist people intend that. That as Black people, we have anti-Black thoughts, just having grown up in a society that's constantly messaging that none of us can get away from anti-Black messaging. It is everywhere, from the time that we are children to the time that we die. And finding who means well, who is well-intended, versus who is just there to exploit a moment is a hard thing to know. In personal relationships, sure, you know who a person was before the George Floyd moment. And so you know who they are after, and you can make your own decision about how you want to deal with someone. But when you have to judge a person that you don't know, or you have to judge an institution that you know only by their history, I have to say we're failing. We're failing people of color. We're failing them politically. We are failing us socially. We are not living up to what we pretended was a unifying moment, the devastating loss of life that we witnessed with George Floyd. And by the way, so many other people since then, right? And I just think until we can get closer to the reality of Black humanity, it's just not going to happen. You know, so I don't hold out hope for a lot, to be honest. And I know that that doesn't make people feel good, but where I do have hope, coming back to Culturati, and really not even as a pitch, but just as like where I genuinely think points of unification happen is when we listen. You know, when dominant culture doesn't feel dominant, doesn't feel like you get the last say, when we're making space for people that don't typically get to have the last say, to say what it is they experience, to say what it is about how they live in the world and view the world and see the world and are impacted by the world, we all stand to be so much better by the folks that we love, by the folks that we don't know, by ourselves. Like, I just believe in humanity. So the closer I feel to understanding people, the better I feel as a person. And I'm hoping that, you know, my show is a microcosm, it's like a 30-minute exercise in doing just that. You know, I tend to highlight the stories of Black women because I am a Black woman and I love Black women, and Black women in this country often are at the bottom of the barrel when it comes to being seen and heard, valued and recognized. Yeah.
So I want to go into Culturati in a moment, but let me just say on the previous topic, you know, the reason I dig in on the pandering piece is I think, you know, as a white guy, right, on the other side of what you're saying and trying to take that in, what I've been struggling with, I think the last couple years, is an increasing awareness of how far we have not come as a country,
right,
and how badly we have failed the Black community, and trying to contrast what I'd say an increasing awareness. It's not that I had none before, but certainly it's evolving. But, you know, how do I live as an entrepreneur, as a business owner, as a father and a provider, and all these different things, and maintain authenticity? Because I think there are societal pressures to respond in a specific way, which I think, you know, I see a lot of good intention behind that, but I'm like, well, hold on. If I'm doing that, if I, you know, when it's the day to put a BLM, you know, sign on your Instagram, I'm reluctant to do that because I don't feel that it doesn't always feel authentic. It feels like there's a compulsion to do. And I'm like, that then it's bullshit, right? And so I am terrified of, you know, making decisions that are driven purely out of accommodating the loudest voice right now and not out of good faith. And I think that that's an increasing challenge.
Great point.
That, you know, it's what's the right way to go? I don't know.
Right.
But I think it's a struggle to hold these two things constant, as it is with so many important things.
And that good faith is worth a lot. That good faith is golden. So you know your good faith, right? So you know the point at which you have genuine curiosity, you have genuine compulsion to try to make a thing better. Listen, if we're not all in on this like anti-racist experiment, if we're not all trying to undo the legacy, the 400 years, right? Because again, your generation, my generation, we didn't start this shit. We inherited a whole bunch of history. Neither you nor I have everything to do with why we are who we are exactly in this point in time. There's a long history that brings us here. But just acknowledging that, I think as a white male, is a very important step. And recognizing that it doesn't help to pander but it does help to care. It does help to have good faith. And people aren't crazy. We know the difference between good faith and bad faith. We know the difference between you just want to sell me something, you just want your company to look good right now because this is a du jour moment and that's what you're to do, versus you're really having a reckoning. You're really trying to understand what you missed. Not that the fingers are being pointed at you because you missed it, but that right here, right now, you're trying to recognize, what did I miss? Just by the mere fact of being white and male, I know that there's some privilege that's assigned to me that I didn't earn. It's just here. How can I be cognizant? That's just a question to ask yourself. And that in and of itself, I think, does a hell of a lot to move us closer to the goal of an anti-racist world, you know?
Mm-hmm.
I
Thank you
do.
for that. Thank you for that. So let's talk about the podcast. Tell me about
I'm a
Culturati.
newbie, so take it easy on me.
Oh, please. It doesn't seem like it. I mean, it's a cool name, and it's a cool concept, and the production is impressive.
Yeah.
I mean, you can tell you've been paying attention to design, but it's, in this case, you don't have the visual, but there's real sound design behind what you're doing. And I can't imagine how much time you're spending in post after you do the interview. We do an interview, we take out some ums and throw that up, or if I said something stupid, get it out.
Right. Right.
But you're doing real production on this stuff. So what's that transition been like for you?
I'm learning so much.
Yeah. And did you ever do anything audio? Did you ever do any radio or anything before?
No. Well, I've been a guest on radio shows,
but
I've
as a
been
creator,
on a shitload of podcasts, but I'd never been behind the scenes on it. And I have so much respect. Oh my goodness. It's just a tremendous amount of work. And you also, speaking of intention, you have to care about your pod, or you'll know. Like, a listener will absolutely know. So Breakbeat, Breakbeat, David Mays, the work that they are trying to do in like platforming hip hop voices. We partnered with PRX, and PRX has really been a godsend in helping me create excellence, because part of my journey, again, by default, because I haven't always been welcomed into every media room I've dreamed of, and I've had to kind of handcraft a career where folks would have me. At this point in my career, I can't not do that. So I am determined to drive toward excellence. I haven't done everything, but the things that I've done, I've really tried to have a very high bar for how that thing shows up in the world. And I knew that with Culturati, if I didn't know shit about podcast production, that I needed to talk to people who did, right? And that I also needed to remember the art of the story. Being a book editor today has been a true gift, and like another dream. Like, I've just had these dream opportunities, but because you're called to remember the arc of a story, and you're called to understand that people are inclined to want to know what happened in the beginning, what happened in the middle, and how did it end? You know what I mean? It just kind of helped me frame the thinking about what my conversations would be and how I could really bring myself and my understanding of the world to what could just be a flat two-way conversation. How do I enrich this experience for the listener? How do I make it cinematic? How do I make it beautiful? I do love images. I want you to see something when you see Culturati in your mind's eye, And so that's about evoking emotion. That's about sound design, like you said. And because Culturati is constantly dipping back into pop culture, like if you are a true Culturati listener, you'll recognize that we're just dropping. You just got to catch it. If you caught it, you caught it. If you didn't, you didn't. But there are moments that we're referencing, there's sounds, there's stuff we're doing that I don't think anyone else is doing quite as clever.
You got some Easter eggs in there.
Yeah, I was going to say, so there's like a lot of Easter eggs. There are a lot of Easter eggs. It's a fun show.
And and the purpose of the show, your vision for the show is?
My vision for the show is to center Black women in the way that we see and experience culture,
Mm-hmm.
and to remember that our perspective, as well as our art, our talent, our might, our force, has a direct impact on you, meaning you, listener, whoever you are. But you might not be attuned to it, right? So if you're not in the world of Black women, particularly the Black feminist leaning women that I tend to talk to on a personal level, you might miss a lot of really brilliant, important shit that actually is shaping your days. And so I see the show as a way for folks to be entertained and informed and enlightened and brought in closer to the hearts and minds of very real, everyday, as well as celebrity Black girls that I personally am co-signing. I'm giving them my Culturati sticker. Once I put the sticker on it, it means it's good to go. You can trust it.
All right, so let's give out some free samples, shall we?
Let's.
Let's start with Q-Tip. So can you give a little description of what that episode is about and how that came to be?
That is a very drunk episode of my homie Scromie, one of my very best friends in the world, and definitely one of my oldest friends in the world. Q-Tip, also known as the Abstract. Q-Tip from A Tribe Called Quest. In the late 80s, he was the front man of one of the largest and most impactful hip hop groups to this moment. A Tribe Called Quest really changed hip hop as we know it, brought jazz to the table, and brought an aesthetic to the table that was very Afrocentric, is what we called it back then, and just conscious. I guess folks would say kind of woke. And it because of who he was in the culture, and because we also had a very real friendship that started at 15 and 16 years old, I wanted to bring him in on an early show so folks could also get to know me. It was a trick bag because I'm positioning the show as though get to know Q-Tip, but it also is a real window into me. It's a window into how I've formed friendships, how I've maintained relationships, how I think, how I thought as a very young girl, and how a lot of what I've learned and seen has enriched me in very unique ways that I bring to the show in very unique ways. So I see that as a really rich episode, not because the sound design is great in that episode, because we actually, I brought my mic to his house. It was a whole thing. He didn't want to do it. It was the least produced show that I think I have, but it was one that was just wrapped in a true personal love.
Well, and you were very, I think you did a nice job punctuating and giving context on some stuff, and even talking about like, what is it like, because you grew up somewhere very, very interesting at a very, very important time. And I do want you to share a little bit about your high school, but like even talking about what it's like when you have a very close friend from the time you're a teenager and you watch them become a worldwide phenomenon, and how do you manage that relationship after the fact? Very, very fascinating. And I would recommend anybody listen to that episode, along with the others. But talk about one of the things that illuminated for me was it's sort of like the book Outliers. It's like, you were surrounded by a certain concoction of individuals that were doing things in a different way and came from a different background that I think gave probably a lot of the background of what's made your career possible. Can you talk about that a little bit?
100%. And it's weird because now when I talk about it, everybody's like, auntie. Okay, I'll take my auntie status, but my world, the specific place and time that I come out of was so unique, so precious, so special. So many incredible people who have really gone on to shape the world that we live in come from that time, come from that space and time. And so it's impossible to talk about cultural impact and not recognize that what we did was will probably never happen again. You know,
Yeah.
the confluence of the people, the art form itself taking shape,
Yeah.
right? So there's
Yeah.
all of that happening. The fact that the first, you know, we have billionaires in hip hop now, right? But Jay, as in Jay-Z, I also work at Rock Lit 101, so I'm partnered with Rock Nation. So I had, you know, I have all of these like intersections, but he comes from Marcy Projects in Brooklyn, right up the block from where I was born, same year, same time, same.
Wow.
So like just in the world, this kind of alchemy of brilliance it hasn't been seen maybe before, or maybe the Harlem Renaissance. I don't know. Like we were just a lot of us happening, a lot of growth, a lot of coming of age at the same time. And now these people are household names. So to come up in that and through that, there's no way that doesn't shape who you are. It gives you a certain kind of pizzazz, but it also gives you, I think, a certain permission when you're in spaces that typically don't want to have you there. You still feel a certain bravado and right to be because you know you come from some magic stuff. And
Yeah.
that's just been my entire generational moment. We really built something. There's no way around that. Like I have teenage boys now, and they always try to take my props from me. Always, they just never want to give them.
It's their job. They're doing their job.
It's their job. It's their, as they listen to all the mumble rap, as we, you know, we debate it all out. But I will not let them take what my generation did for this game. The only reason we can sit around talking about your mumble rap is because of the brilliance of my peers. And so as long as we're clear, we're good on the future. And
Well,
Culturati, bringing it back to that, I'm really careful, and I'm going to do a lot more of this, of just having an intergenerational conversation. We are always going to be talking to people who are different ages about the same thing because it's interesting.
Okay, I know we're running out of time here. I want one more sample. A hoe evolution and critical race WAP. Care to explain?
Well, y'all gonna have to come to the show. But the word hoe has actually, this is another thing, again, with my generation, there's been an evolution of language. And the ways in which we use words has really changed. It's shifted. And I wanted to explore and examine specifically the word hoe because of some things that had happened in popular culture of late, which is a thing that Culturati does. We kind of take from pop culture happenings now and apply them to the lens of history. So hoe is one of those things that we go really deep in, and I have a lot of great help breaking that down. And then what was the second part of the question you asked me?
I asked you to explain critical race WAP.
Well, I'm goofy. So that's what people need to know about me. Like, as much as I like smart folks to come on my show and kick it with me, I just want to have fun. I want us to be able to laugh at the world around us and the way that culture is like some crazy ass shit that we all have to unpack, or maybe not. So critical race theory and the crazy that's happening around it is something that is important to me. Critical race theory, actually, as a real idea, I believe is something that is edifying for all of us, because again, it helps us understand American history. It puts things in a proper context. So the hoopla around critical race theory is so far from what it actually is. But I wanted to enrich that a little bit because I was talking about WAP, which stands for wet ass poop. And if you don't know, find out, Google, and talk about the ways in which Black female sex positivity, specifically being progressive around, sexuality and our bodies, our physical bodies, actually intersects with this idea of critical race theory and understanding the ways in which race and systems have impacted us all. So I was trying to both be smart and silly at the same time. And I think
mission accomplished.
Mission accomplished. Yeah.
You did it well, and it's good for tagging. SEO.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Let's start to wind down. I'm only about halfway through what I wanted to talk to you about, but we're just gonna have to pick it up another time. Yeah, for sure. Okay. So you have this podcast. You are advertiser friendly. What would you say to the advertising community who might want to give this a look?
I'd say that, for one, you have folks who are listening who are, by and large, educated people who have some money to spend. And I just know that from my years at Ebony and my years of cultivating audiences in this space. There are a lot of shot callers in the home, people who are the decision makers, right? And there are also people who are not just decision makers, but influencers in their own worlds. So I don't just mean this in a digital capacity in the way that we use the term influencer now to mean if you have 1.5 million followers, then you're an influencer. No, I mean in their small circles, in their real life circles, these people are the ones who are bringing new ideas to the table. These are the folks who other people want to look like, dress like, because I want to believe, kind of like me, my audience is made up of, at its core, some fly girls. We like a good shoe. We like a good bag. We also read a good book. We watch a good film. We like to have a great drink. We're indulging in life. So advertisers who want to reach people who are creating ripples wherever they go, come to Culturati. That's what I'd say. Yeah.
And rapid fire, do you have a hot take on everything that's happening with Joe Rogan right now as it relates to podcasting and media?
Yeah, I mean, it's not that hot a take, and it's probably not that quick because it's complex. I mean, I get Rogan. I also think that to whom much is given, much is required. And the moment you lose sight of your power, and to me, the idea of falling down these rabbit holes that are just foundationally bogus is dangerous. And I just think that, I am a pro-science person. And I really think that if you find yourself feeling anti-science ever, have that be a private conversation with your crew and your boo and whoever else. Talk it out, debate it out, but don't bring that to the masses. And I think he really messed up there. Coming back from something like that is very hard to do. The Joe Rogans of the world could do a lot better to help heal racial divisions. They could do a lot more. You could recognize your privilege and your power in a more active way. We don't just need to be entertained. We all need to be informed. And part of that, coming back to the question of Black humanity, is like, who do you have in that chair? Who are you talking to? Who are you talking about? When you're a Joe Rogan, when you have that seat of power and all ears are on you, all eyes are on you, I just think that you could do even more to honor it. But that's just my little humble take. Whenever he wants me on, I'll be sure to have that conversation with him, just like I did with Hillary.
Fair enough.
Just like I did with Hillary.
Fair enough. Well, thanks for having that conversation with me. I mean, you've been generous. You've been authentic as you always are, but I keep learning a lot from you, and I hope this is the first of many. And,
me too.
So let's keep this conversation going, even though we're going to cut it off for today. I really appreciate you.
All good. I appreciate you too. Thanks so much.
And where can people follow you?
Follow me at Kierna Mayo. So that's KIERNA MAYO on all platforms.
Perfect. Thank you so much. This show is dedicated to advancing our mission of mobilizing marketers to advance truth and civility in journalism. We value clarity, truth, fairness, respect, de-escalation, and tolerance, and we invite you to connect with us at MediaRoundtable.com. If you found this show helpful and you're committed to our cause, please follow us on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you like to listen. It's always free, and if you're a marketer looking for support to live these values out, You can get in touch with our agency, Oxford Road, by visiting oxfordroad.com and subscribe to our weekly newsletter, The Influencer. Special thanks to Dave Mays, Bianca, Kyle, Jennifer, and the team at Podcast One. And as always, influence responsibly.